The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
And somewhat frigid evening, I welcome you all to the 92nd Street Y. My name is Phil Miller. I am the director of the Bronfman Center for Jewish Life here at the Y, and on behalf of the Y and the Bronfman Center, it's a pleasure to have you all here this evening for what is really a very special evening for the Y and for the Bronfman Center, and I think for all of us. In honoring and welcoming Professor Yaakov Malkin to our midst. Before I introduce Professor Malkin, I want to take just a minute to talk about the Center for Cultural Judaism, who is our partner and collaborator in creating this evening's program. The Center for Cultural Judaism is a new organization that develops and supports programs to meet the needs of cultural, secular, non-religious, and humanistic Jews here in New York and throughout the United States. Its educational and outreach programs include support of courses in high school and college for the study of Jewish culture, recommended reading on the subject of cultural and secular Judaism, a website with liturgy for home celebrations, and maybe at some point that evening we will give out what that website is, and new seminar series such as this evening's program. Before we go further, I would like to recognize Felix and Daniel Posen, who are here with us this evening, who were both instrumental in creating and founding the center, and we are very honored to have them here with us this evening. So now, as you can see, this is quite a nice turnout for this program, and in response to that, not only are we having our program this evening, but inspired by this response to this evening, the Bronfman Center will be offering a class in cultural humanistic Judaism this spring, being taught by Rabbi Peter Schweitzer. It begins February 11th, Wednesday, February 11th, and there'll be 5 sessions here at the Y. For those of you who receive the Y catalog, which I'm sure is just about all of you, I urge you, if you are intrigued and taken by what you learned this evening, please come back and join us for this what I think will be a very special class with Rabbi Schweitzer beginning in February. And now for my introduction of Professor Yaakov Malkin. Long at the forefront of secular Jewish education, Professor Yaakov Malkin is the founder and academic director of Meitar, the College of Judaism as Culture in Jerusalem, and co-dean of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, which trains and ordains humanistic rabbis to serve communities in North America and Israel. And as I'm told, the very first humanistic rabbi was just ordained in Israel very recently. But I will give Professor Malkin the pleasure of just talking about that, and in particular who she is. He is editor of Free Judaism, a quarterly published in Jerusalem, professor of aesthetics and rhetoric at Tel Aviv University. He has also taught literature and literature of theater and cinema during a distinguished academic career spanning more than 4 decades. Professor Malkin was founder-director of the first community culture centers in Israel, the Rothschild Center and the Hagefen Arab Jewish Center, which is still a thriving community center. In 1971, he founded the Israeli Adult Education Monthly and served as editor until 1975. In 1971, Professor Malkin also won the Katz Adult Education Award. In 1947, Professor Malkin was director broadcaster of the Haganah Radio Telem Shamir Boaz. He's also a playwright and author, and served as director of the repertoire department of the Habimah Theater. Professor Malkin's recently published book in English is Secular Judaism, Faith, Values, and Spirituality. And he will be available for book signing, as his books will be available for sale immediately after this evening's program. And so anyone wanting to do so will join Professor Malkin and the booksellers from the Center for Cultural Judaism at the back of the room following his talk this evening. His forthcoming books are entitled Faith, Values, and Spirituality of Secular Jews and God and Other Literary Characters. It is an honor and pleasure to welcome him here to the 92nd Street Y. We hope this is the first of many visits. He has been here before as a patron, but this is now his first time here, first of many visits, hopefully, as a speaker, Professor Yaakov Malkin. After Professor Malkin's presentation, so just hold your questions, and as soon as he's finished, there'll be opportunity both as an audience and then afterwards to interact with Professor Malkin.
Good evening, and thanks for the introduction. My subject is secular Judaism. What is secular Judaism? Is there such a thing as secular Judaism, many people ask. Well, there is. Secular Judaism has two meanings. One, all the people who feel free from their duties of fulfilling the mitzvot of Jewish religion. And this includes people who have actually no connection with Jewish culture because they live out of Jewish culture, what you call unaffiliated. The second meaning is secular Judaism as a culture, as the sum total of all the creativity of secular Judaism in the last 200 years, of all the new ways of life, of the new traditions, of the schools and cultural institutions that were created by secular Judaism. Secular Judaism is the biggest Judaism among all the Judaisms in Judaism. It is biggest because there are so many people who are secular Jews. Secular Jews in the simple meaning that they are not religious. In this country last year, the survey of Egon Meyer and Kesar of the Graduate School of City College here in New York showed that over 50% of all Jews in America consider themselves secular, or what they call somewhat secular, and from a Jewish point of view, there isn't such a thing as somewhat secular. But secular Judaism is not a protest movement. It is not anti-religious. It is not against religion. Some of my best friends are religious. Secular Judaism relates to religion because it is part of Jewish culture. And secular Judaism believes, secular Judaism as a culture is part of Judaism as culture. And there's no question that Jewish religion played a major role in the history of Jewish culture. Till the 18th century, it was the most dominant role of all other trends within Judaism. So therefore, religion is not foreign to secular Judaism. It is part of Jewish culture and therefore part of our Judaism. What we are against, together with many humanist religious people, is the marriage between religion and totalitarian power. The marriage of religion and totalitarian power is one of the most dangerous marriages in the history of the world. Whenever religion gets totalitarian power, it becomes a danger to its own people and a danger to other people. There was even a period in our history where Judaism was like that, when the Maccabean kings canceled the division between the king and the priest, between the religious and the non-religious authority, which was an innovation. Then, during the time, the Hellenistic time of Alexander Yanai and other kings, Judaism became dangerous. They forced people to convert, like the Edomites, like the Samaritans. But this was for a very short period. Then it went to other religions. Christianity, which started as a Jewish religion, with great Jewish works like the New Testament, Christianity developed as a power, as a totalitarian power, once the church was established, once the Roman Empire adopted it as a religion of the empire. And when Christianity became a totalitarian power, it became dangerous for all the people who were under Christianity in Europe, for all the people who suffered from the Inquisition or from the Crusaders. And luckily for Europe and for the West, came the Renaissance, the revival of humanism, came the secularization process that divided and separated religion from authority, religion from totalitarian authority, and started the process of democratization of the Western world. Unfortunately, we are facing today the Islamic world, in which the Islamic religion, the radical Islamic religion, gained totalitarian authority in most countries where the Islamic religion is prevalent. And therefore, and because they did not go through the process of Renaissance and Enlightenment, and because they did not go through the process of secularization, therefore they became a danger, mainly to the Arab nations, but also to all other nations. So secular Judaism relates to religion not as a danger, not as an enemy, not in an antagonistic way, but as a source of its culture. The paradox of secular Judaism is that though it is the biggest organization or the biggest movement or biggest trend in Judaism, though it is the culture of half of all the Jewish people living today in Israel, the majority of Jewish youth under 18 is already living in Israel and is already being educated in the systems of secular Judaism. The educational system of secular Judaism in Israel has about 70% of all the pupils. 80% of all the parents send their children to non-religious school, to the secular Jewish schools. There are Jewish schools in which Judaism as culture is the basis of their education. Children from the age of 3 in kindergarten till the age of 18 when they finish high school are studying the Bible in the secular schools. They are not doing it in the religious schools, mainly not in the Haredi, in the extreme religious schools, where they are not teaching Bible at all. They are teaching only Talmud. Judaism, secular Judaism for the majority of Israelis is their national culture. Therefore, for many of them, it seems to be so self-understood that they do not bother about thinking about Judaism. They do not bother about their self-consciousness, their self-definition. And this is the paradox, that on one hand, it is the biggest Judaism among all Judaisms. On the other hand, it's the weakest Judaism among all the others. Weakest in the sense that it has no organization. Weakest in the sense that so many people, though they know that they are secular, don't know what secular means. What does it mean to be a secular Jew? How do they differ from non-Jews? How do they differ from religious Jews? In a positive way, not in what they don't do, but what do they do? What are their duties? What are the beliefs that are expressed in their way of life but are not articulated by them? This is the reason why secular Judaism as such is not represented in any world organization of Judaism. This is the reason why Judaism, secular Judaism as such, has no representation, no leadership that is trying to secure its interests, its educational interests, trying to interiorate the values of secular Judaism. In order to do that, in order to develop an educational system in which secular Jews will become conscious of their secular Judaism, we have to change our view of the past, not only of the present. Because Judaism as culture is an approach which is completely different than Judaism as religion. And in so many schools, in so many colleges, in so many universities, Judaism is taught as a religion, as one of the religions, as the Christian religion, the Islam religion, the Jewish religion. But it's completely different from the others. The Jewish religion is unique in the sense that it was always a national religion. Only the Jews had this religion. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism are international religions. There are many, many religions, many, many nations in which these religions are prevalent. But Jewish religion played such a major role in our culture because it was a national religion. And therefore it is so part of us, secular Jews, to study the Jewish religion as much as to study our own new culture that was created in the last 200 years outside of Jewish religion. Many people start to doubt the possibility of understanding the continuity of Judaism since it's changed so much. What is common, they say, between Jews who are religious and Jews who are not religious? From what point of view do they belong to Judaism? Both. How is it possible to understand the history of a people who changed so much since the biblical times till today? Since we are one of the oldest people, 3,000 years at least, we had a lot of chances to change. And when we changed, the changes were radical. The change between biblical Judaism and rabbinical Judaism and Hellenistic Judaism and medieval Judaism and Enlightenment Judaism and secular Judaism, they are enormous. The differences are enormous. What unites them? What is common to them? Robert Graves quotes a Greek proverb saying, "My grandfather gave me a hatchet. My father changed the blade. I changed the handle." So what was left? My grandfather still gave me a hatchet. My grandfather gave me Judaism. So much has changed, and still I am a Jew. This enigma, who is a Jew, what is a Jew, sometimes we think it is unique to us. I learned from my son, a professor in Greek history, who wrote now a book called Who is a Greek, that it's not only unique to Jews, because the mere definition of a nation is changing. The mere definition of a nation is not an invention of the 19th century, as so many historians and sociologists want to say. Herodotus already mentioned the common characteristic of nations when he spoke in the name of the Athenians, saying, "We are part of Greece, we are Greeks, because of our customs, because of our temples, because of our blood, and because of our tradition." Now, these four elements seem to be common to all nations in the world, except for blood. Nations do not have the same DNA. Nations have the same culture. So that the Jewish nation from this point of view is not different than other nations, because we, like other nations, are made of many, many races. There are black Jews, and there are white Jews, and there are Abyssinian Jews, and there are Gruzinian Jews, there are American and Polish and Lithuanian Jews. They are different from the point of view of race, of color, but they have something in common, which is their culture. Their common denominator is being conscious of one past, being conscious of having one history, one culture with a history of 3,000 years, which is spelled out in the Bible. I consider the Bible the only common denominator of all Judaisms in Judaism. Because there are many who do not know what's written in the Talmud. There are many who have no idea what's written in the Zohar. There are many who do not know what is Kabbalah. But all of them, either they know or they think they know what is written in the Bible. The Bible is a book read by all Jews, or supposed to be read by all Jews. Foster said that when he will be retired, he will read all the books he always said he read. Many of us still didn't read the Bible. Many of us read the Bible and didn't understand it. Many of us changed their understanding when they passed from religious Judaism to secular Judaism. Because the present changes the past. The present is the beginning of history. Every historian lives in the present, and he's influenced by the new revelations, by the new discoveries, by the new research, and his view of the past is changing in the present, so that the picture of the past is changed. So is the picture of the Bible. Many biblical texts seem to be completely different than what they were when there was no secular Judaism. An example. Jacob, those who know Hebrew know that it not a very nice name. My name is also Jacob. It's not a nice name because it characterizes the youth of this young man who unfortunately wasn't the firstborn. And because he wasn't the firstborn, he decided to fight destiny. That's one of the great differences between the literary characters of the Bible and the literary characters of Greek tragedy. In Greek tragedy, the characters are ruled by their destiny, succumb to their destiny, like Oedipus, like Medea, like Antigone. In biblical characters, they fight destiny. And Jacob fought destiny more than any others. Since he wasn't the firstborn, he didn't have the rights of the firstborn, but he wanted them. He wanted the blessing, he wanted the right of the firstborn, he wanted the right of the country which was promised to his grandfather, to Abraham. But how could he get it? He couldn't. So he cheated, he stole, he disguised himself. He persuaded his innocent brother Esau to sell him the right of the firstborn. He cheated his blind old father by disguising himself and saying, I am Esau. But this young, very unsympathetic man became completely different when he fell in love. He fell in love with his cousin, with Rachel, when he escaped from his brother, who wanted to kill him, of course. And when he fell in love, he suddenly became a different person. He didn't cheat anymore. He didn't lie. He didn't steal. He worked very hard. He realized that to win destiny, you have to work. In order to understand and to acquire the right of the firstborn, this can be done only by very hard work and very skilled work. He was one of the first bioengineers in history. He engineered the flocks of his father-in-law in a way that he himself became very rich. He worked very hard, and he was ready to work 7 years for his beloved, which is quite an exceptional thing. There are many lovers who are willing to die for their beloved, but very few who are willing to work for their beloved. He worked 7 years without getting anything, no salary. And then this very clever writer of the story, of the biblical story, describes the night that finally he could get his beloved, the night of the wedding. But then suddenly his father-in-law changed the beloved for her sister. And Jacob, being a man, a male man, and like all male men, sometimes do not distinguish between the beloved and the non-beloved when the desire is there. So he slept with Leah instead of sleeping with Rachel. And he found himself in the morning the husband of her sister, of the one he hated. And still, in spite of this failure, he continued to work. He continued another 7 years working without a salary for his beloved. And then, when he became rich, finally, he felt that he is really the owner of the right of the firstborn. But then comes the symbolic ending of this beginning of this first part of the life of Jacob. He comes to Israel, he comes back to his land, he wants to take over because it is his land, it was promised to him now, and suddenly he meets a man who doesn't let him go, who doesn't let him pass the border. This man is like any other man. He doesn't know who it is. So they struggle. They struggle all night. Jacob doesn't know that this man is God. Jacob knows that God is in the image of man, because so was God created, in the image of man. But Jacob doesn't know that the man that he's fighting is God. He's not only fighting him, he's overcoming him. He embraces him in a way that he cannot go. And when the dawn comes up and this man wants to go away, Jacob doesn't let him. He says, "First you tell me your name." And the man tells his name, but in a roundabout way. He says, "Your name will not be Jacob anymore. Your name will be Israel, he who fought with men and gods and overcame them." Now, many of you don't know this story. They know another story. They know a story that was invented by Catholic painters and by rabbinical darshanim who tell us that Jacob fought with an angel. And we see the pictures of Jacob with an angel, with the angel has big wings, but it's not written in the Bible. It was written by people who were frightened by this story. How is it possible that in all the history of religious literature, there is a man overcoming El, overcoming God? But after all, Jacob was the only witness to this event. There was nobody there except him, he who tells the story. Why shouldn't we believe him when he says, "This place will be called Pni El," the face of God, because there I saw God face to face? And then suddenly, God becomes a different thing in the eyes of the reader when he reads the story without the taboo, without being frightened by religious fright, reading it as a secular Jew, reading it as literature. Literature is a powerful thing. Literature is very, very strong. Fiction is creating reality. Sometimes when reality is very confusing, we turn to fiction. But fiction influences history. Because fiction creating reality, like fiction who created God and created Jacob, who created Abraham, is influencing history and the present. The present is changing the past, but the past is changing the present. The people in Hebron in Israel who fight over the burial place of Abraham, the Muslims and the Jews, believe in the story of Abraham who bought this burial place for his family, except that the Muslims are sure that it was bought for them, the Jews are sure that it was bought for them, but they are willing to sacrifice their life because fiction is so strong, because it created an Abraham that there is no doubt in their mind that did exist and did buy this burial place. Mark Twain said, "What is the difference between fiction and reality? Fiction makes sense." Reality, this reality of two people fighting over a burial place, that a story says that Abraham bought 2,500 or 3,000 years ago, this doesn't make sense. But the story makes sense. Therefore, the story creates literary heroes. One of them is God. Now, the change in secular Judaism and in its attitude and its approach to the past and to literature is a very, very basic change in our Judaism, in our Jewishness. And it enables us to open the world of Judaism, the history of Judaism, the religious writing and the non-religious writing to our students, because it doesn't consider the belief in religion as a condition. And it doesn't take the explanation or the meaning that is given to the writings by religious leaders or religious scholars. But the second and most important difference between secular Judaism and other Judaisms is the belief. I know that many people speak about secular Jews as non-believers, but this is real nonsense. There aren't people who are non-believers if they are humane, if they are human. Humans cannot be satisfied with knowledge, because knowledge is only the knowledge of what is. Belief is the belief in what ought to be. Ethics is based on belief. We can examine it by knowledge, we can try it out by knowledge, we can see if it works or doesn't work. But the principles of ethics are principles of belief. And our faith in these principles, in the humanistic principles, is the basis of our society, is the basis of being able to live in an open, developing society in which we live. Without this faith, without this belief, and without these principles, society will fall apart. Now, of course, there are many religious humanists and secular humanists. In Judaism, both of them believe, I hope, in what Hillel said: never do to the other what you hate being done to you. This, Hillel said, is the essence of the whole Torah, is the essence of whole Judaism. And when European ethics were developed on the basis of the Kantian, of Immanuel Kant's demand that you should never treat the other as means to an end, but as an end in itself, and that you should understand that every ethical principle must be universal or it's not ethical, it corresponds with the principle of Hillel. These three principles are the basis of our humanism. These three principles make us discern between good and bad. And these three principles do not depend on a certain period in history. They are ancient, they are modern. As far as we know, they are forever. The difficulty was that for so many years, people were used to think about morality as part of religion. And therefore, when they got out of religion, when the secularization process brought so many people to realize that whatever they believe in, they do not believe in a personal God. They do not believe in a God that commands them through certain religious leaders or in the mouth of certain rabbis. When people realized that, they were afraid that morality will fall apart, that faith will fall apart, that everything will disappear, that there will be anarchy. And therefore atheism became such a dirty word, because people were afraid that without the authority of God, without the authority of God that gives the authority to ethics, there will be no ethics. And this may be one of the most important differences between secular and religious Judaism. Secular Judaism is basing himself on humanistic principles, of international, universal humanistic principles, like those of Hillel and Kant. So why do they have to be part of Jewish education? Why do they have to be part of Judaism? Because all universal values are being taught and interiorized by us through our national culture. Because all of us live in a national culture. In the diaspora, people live in more than one national culture. They live in the American national culture, or the English or the French, and in the Jewish national culture. In Israel, they do not have many choices. They live only in one national Jewish culture. But anyhow, their education at home, in their community, in their schools, is always an education through their national culture. And therefore, the international, universal, humanistic values are absorbed by us through our national culture. Once we acknowledge that these principles are the principles of ethics and they don't need the authority of a personal God, then we are not afraid anymore of our faith in these principles, of our faith in human beings being the ones who invent the laws, who invent the principles, who invent God. And by the way, this is not an innovation of secular Judaism. The Rambam, Maimonides, in his Guide to the Perplexed, explained to us that it is impossible to believe that God was really walking in his garden, like it's written in the Bible, that God is like a human being, that God is some kind of a personal or person who can speak, who can command. Why? Because Maimonides, in the Guide of the Perplexed, not in other writings before that, but in the Guide of the Perplexed, continuing the ideas of Aristotle through the philosophy of the Muslim, realized that God is a concept, is a concept of superior intelligence. It's the supreme intelligence which created the world by creating the laws of nature. The Rambam, who was a scientist and a rationalist and a religious Jew, believed in the Guide of the Perplexed in a God who is the basis of all the laws of physics. And therefore, to speak about a God who is so remote, who is so supreme, who is impossible to conceive in our senses or even in our concepts, a God like that cannot be a person. So why is he a person in the stories of Genesis? Why does he act like a person? Why do we speak about what he said, what he does? Why do we speak about his arm, his hand, his mouth? Because, says the Rambam, simple people, ignorant people, and he was an elitist, cannot understand what I'm speaking about. They cannot understand the supreme intelligence. They need a story. And the story was invented by human beings, by those who wrote the Genesis. So my feeling is that when I speak as a secular Jew about God as a literary character, I'm not innovating, I'm continuing a belief that was started by Maimonides in the Guide of the Perplexed. And therefore I cannot rely anymore on the sayings of God as a basis of my ethics. I have to form my ethics. I have to study my ethics. And once I believe in them, I can base my ethics, what Auguste Comte called the agnostic ethics, ethics without religion. But this is based only on one basic feeling that human beings have, and maybe only human beings have. The feeling and the knowledge, the initiation, the feeling that there is a difference between good and bad. And as you know, the original sin of God, described in the Bible in chapter 2 of Genesis, was that he forbade people to know the difference between good and bad. He allowed them to eat from all the fruit of all the trees, but not from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. In other words, not to be able to discern good from bad. Why? We don't know. It is a story about a reality. It doesn't make sense. But when he created, in the second version of creation, because in the first version of creation, in the chapter A of Genesis, which is a basis of humanism, he created the world through his words. He wasn't there as a presence, the words were the presence. And the words created the world, in the spirit of the Rambam. The words created the world in an evolutionary way, from the big explosion of light through various stages of creating a universe, of creating life, and finally of creating the human, man and woman, male and female, in the image of God, because God is male and female, according to this story, and men and women are the beginning of humanity. But in the second story, he created, first of all, Adam, a man. He created him in order to make him work in his garden, because God is described there as a farmer who plants a garden and needs somebody to work in his garden. So he sculpts from the earth, from Adamah, a figure of human being, his own figure, because it's in the image of God, and he makes him alive, and there is Adam from Adamah, a human being. But this human being, God made a mistake, is very unhappy when he's alone. So God sculpted many other creatures, but Adam was still unhappy because they were not real company to him. Finally, he decided to operate. So he put him to sleep in a modern way. He took out something from him in the first cloning operation in history. He created a woman. He created a woman in order to be a helper of Adam, a helper of man. It's the only creature that is not created for itself, but created to be a helper of somebody else, a servant of somebody else. But this creation was a surprise, because this woman was not willing to be satisfied with satisfaction. Satisfaction, is in the Garden of Eden, what we call paradise. There is satisfaction, but she wasn't satisfied with that. She wasn't satisfied with and wasn't willing to accept this terrible, terrible law that she's not allowed to eat from the tree of knowledge, good and bad. Especially when she had this wonderful conversation with Nachash, Nachash meaning the one who divines. It's also a snake, but it's the one who divines, the one who knows what will be. And when she says that she cannot eat from this tree because God said that whoever eats from the tree of knowledge dies, Nachash says you don't die from knowing. It's not always comfortable to know, but you don't die from it. God said it only because he didn't want you to be like him. So finally, she looks at the tree, she looks at the fruit, and the fruit, and here comes the aesthetic side of the story, the fruit, says the writer, was so nice, and so nice to know, nechmad lahaskil, so beautiful, so attractive that she couldn't stand, and she ate. And when she ate from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, like Prometheus, she freed humanity. Because humanity till then was psychopathic. They didn't know the difference between good and bad. Humanity till then was satisfied with satisfaction, with the paradise. From then on starts a new era. The era of knowing good and bad, the era of culture, the era of production, the era of work. They are finally out of this Garden of Eden, and they are in the world, and there is agriculture, and there is art, and there is music. All this happens in the biblical story immediately after she overcame the original sin of God. But in the religious history, the original sin was referred from God to the woman. Quite late, in the 4th century, Augustinus, etc., but also in Jewish religion. And therefore, in spite of so many humanistic religious Jews, there are still laws who discriminate women. And we in Israel, for instance, like in Pakistan, we allow not only civil law, but also religious courts. And the religious courts are working, like in Pakistan, according to the Sharia, or the Jewish religious court, not like in Pakistan, are working according to the halakha, to our religion. And there you can discriminate against women. And there, the curse that God cursed Eve because she succeeded in overcoming his terrible decree, says this could be written only by a woman. Because it is the essence of making a woman less than a man, of discriminating her, of making her subservient to a man. Not only is she enslaved by him, not only is her life of pain, but she loved him. And her love encourages and enforces the enslavement. It's a beautiful written invention of the basis of feminism. Now, for us, secular Jews, we are not fighting religion, but whenever religion has the power to enforce anti-humanistic laws, like the law against women in the rabbinical courts, where they can be judged, but they cannot be judges, there we have a cause to fight for justice, for these humanistic principles that we were talking about. Finally, I believe that secular humanism, as a culture, as an education, as a new system of looking at the past, as a critical way and as an encouraging way of knowing not only secularity but also religion, this is one of the only hopes for all these unaffiliated Jews, for all those Jews who live outside of Jewish world. When Sigmund Freud wrote the preface to the translation of his book, Totem and Taboo. Totem and Taboo was translated in 1930 into Hebrew, and he wrote the preface, and he says, "I'm happy that it is translated into the language of my people, though I don't know it. I don't know the culture. I have no connection with this religion like with any other religion, but I know that I'm a Jew. Though I do not have the words to express how and why I'm a Jew, I am a Jew." And by saying that, and this was before the persecution that he went through, by saying that, he expresses the potentiality and the will of so many secular people to know their culture, to know their language, to know their origin, to be enriched by this tremendous thing called Judaism. Judaism is one of the richest cultures in the world. Secular Judaism is maybe the biggest body of creative work in Judaism. Between 1870 and 1939, 18,000 different books were written in Yiddish alone. Every year, secular Judaism in Israel produces 4,000 new books. Hundreds of films, of performances in theater, of poems, of songs. It's a very rich culture, but it is rich because it is based on the richness of Judaism of 3,000 years. Therefore, our education is connected, is based on the knowledge of Judaism, not only of the understanding of our secularity, but of the knowledge of our culture. Therefore, people like me believe in what the Spanish film director Luis Buñuel said, "Thanks God, I'm still an atheist." Thank you.
Some time now for question and answer, and so if you could just raise your hand, we'll get to as many people as possible. Except I urge people, this is time for question and answer. Short question, please. These are not opportunities for speeches, and I will enforce that rule strongly. Okay. All right. Yes, sir. In the back. Quick.
If you do all of that and become knowledgeable in the Tanakh, ritual, Tefillah, Hebrew, and the history of Israel, and the history of the diaspora, what makes you different from a religious Jew?
You want me to repeat the question? Okay. I'm going to try very quickly. The gist of the question is there a canonical text, a single canonical text for secular Judaism, and once you have mastered that text and its information, what really is the difference between you and someone who is religious? Professor Malkin.
Well, canonical text, yes. It is completely different from the canonical text of religious Jews, because most religious Jews, it depends what kind of religious Jews, because Jewish culture is a pluralistic culture. And there are many, many religious Jews and religions within Judaism. I mean, the extreme Orthodox and the Reform and the Conservative, etc., are completely different. Rabbi Shach from what they call Lithuanian Jews in Israel used to say that the Lubavitcher is the closest religion to Judaism. So each one of them has a canonical text. Each one of them thinks that their Judaism is the normative religion. I believe that what secular Judaism does is, because of the principle of pluralism, we are creating new choices of canonical text. We are basing ourselves on the Bible because, as I said, this is the basis of Jewish nationality and Jewish culture. But then we are choosing from all different trends in Judaism. For instance, in the Hellenistic period, we choose not only from the Talmud and the Midrash, but we choose also from Philo from Alexandria, from Flavius, from the Maccabeans. The Maccabean books were books that Rabbi Akiva said that whoever reads them is losing his chance to life after death. And in order not to lose this chance, we are still reading the Maccabeans. We are, when we read medieval literature, our choice, there is always a question of choice. The canonical text is always a question of what you choose. And Bialikin, 100 years ago, proposed that we should choose texts that are representative of each period in Jewish history, but of all the trends in this period. And therefore, to say a canonical text is impossible, but to say a principle of choosing from all canonical texts and choosing the best and those texts that are relevant to our beliefs, this is important. Therefore, the difference between religious Jews and non-religious Jews is that we do not have a canonical text. We have the principle of choosing from all texts because we are not the chosen people. We are the people of choice.
Generally, the Jewish people have survived by connecting themselves in part to an institution known as a synagogue. And generally, most societies have survived through institutionalizing themselves. How do you propose that secular Judaism institutionalize itself, provide a structure for Judaism to survive?
Just to repeat, the question is how will secular Judaism institutionalize itself, and what will its institutions be to survive?
I think that it's very important that you mention the synagogue because I consider the synagogue one of the most important contributions of Judaism as a whole to human culture. We have to remember that when Jews invented the synagogue somewhere in the end of the first millennium BC, they invented a new institution, a new community institution, which was not a temple where you sacrifice sacrifices to God, but it was an assembled place, a Beit Knesset, a Beit Itkansut, assembly, synagogue, place to get together the community to study the history, to study the literature, to study the culture of the Jews. And the importance of this invention was that they did away with the tribal community or with the clan community, and they created a cultural community that is based on the synagogue. The synagogue, for me, is one of the most important institutions in the history of Judaism, and it became one of the most important institutions in the history of humanity because it spread through the Jewish Christians. It went into Christianity, it went into Islam. It's now a accepted thing to have community centers of culture some religious and some non-religious. And therefore I believe that the attempt that is being done here in the last 60 years, last 40 years in America, by a movement of the humanistic secular Jews, started by Rabbi Sherwin Wein in Detroit, is exactly doing what you were referring to. They are starting secular synagogues. Secular synagogues in the original sense of the word. Places of assembly, of learning of culture, of experiencing the holidays, of new ways of celebrating the holidays and celebrating the life cycle, the bar mitzvah, the wedding, the birth of a child, of a girl or a boy. And they are also preparing people who are leading the synagogues, like rabbinical rabbi, like rabbinical secular officiate. And I was invited before to mention the first Israeli secular rabbi. I am happy to do it because it's my daughter who was ordained as a secular rabbi after studying for about 20 years Judaism in various ways and being prepared now to start maybe a fight with those who do not believe that such a thing is possible.
Yes, but very good. Yeah, please.
I was wondering if it makes sense to speak of converting to secular Judaism. In other words, can someone who's not Jewish convert to secular Judaism? So how and what would be difficulty involved in such a process?
I imagine that this is possible, like converting.
Everybody understand the question? All right, the question is a conversion. Is conversion necessary within the structure of secular Judaism? And if so, what would conversion look like?
Well, it's possible to become part of Judaism, and if you are religious, of part of religious Judaism, if you are secular, part of secular Judaism. Becoming part of Judaism, as the Bible explained to us, has nothing to do with conversion. It has to do with joining the people, joining the culture, taking part of the culture, being part of the society or of the community. In Israel, we have now about 200,000 people who are defined by the rabbinate as non-Jews because their mother was not Jewish. According to that, some of our most important kings couldn't become Jews because all of them had a mother or a grandmother who wasn't Jewish, including David. But once you do away with the biological distinction and you think about Judaism as a culture, so becoming part of that culture doesn't involve you in any ceremony of conversion. And therefore, I believe that it's possible, of course, to join Judaism, and secular Judaism included, but not through conversion.
Okay, lots of questions still. Yes, right.
Yes, I would like to know, in what way does a secular Jew who is steeped in all the ritualistic aspects of the Jewish religion, or as you call it, the culture, how is that person different from a religious Jew?
Because it's not as I call it.
Can everybody get to the question? How a person a secular Jew, who practices all the different things that Professor Malkin has discussed, what is the difference between that person and that secular Jew and a religious Jew?
The difference is that a religious Jew is not practicing the Jewish culture, but he's practicing part of the Jewish culture. I mean, he may be practicing the rest too, but his obligation, and usually, and most of them, especially in the extreme religious Orthodox, are practicing only a very small part of Jewish culture. the part that is defined by the mitzvot, by the commandments of religion and of what we call halacha. The word halacha, by the way, in Hebrew, comes from the verb to walk, to go. And therefore, it was a word that meant a development, a constant development. But from the 19th century on, when Orthodoxy started to pretend to be the normative Judaism, halacha stopped walking. And the commandments became fixed commandments. So religious Jews are Jews by fulfilling and obeying these commandments, while secular Jews who know about religion know also about the culture, and the culture is much wider and much richer. It includes, for instance, as I said, the last 200 years of Jewish creativity, which was most of it done in secular Judaism. It includes, for instance, Zionism that was based and led and founded by secular Judaism. Or the anti-Zionist great movements like the Bund, like the communist movement, the Jewish communist movement. All this is part of Jewish culture. The great mistake, the terrible mistake that is done in so many schools and so many colleges is teaching the Holocaust instead of teaching the culture of the Jews in the 20th century. The Holocaust was a traumatic, terrible, unprecedented event, and it should be taught, but it shouldn't be taught without being part of the great culture that was killed by the Holocaust, because not only people were killed, a whole culture was killed. Most of this culture was secular culture. So the difference is between obeying certain commandments written in Shulchan Aruch, written in the religious text, and living in the richness of the pluralistic Jewish culture.
Can I just add something to that question? Supposing somebody, you're talking about the culture and doing the things that are right, you were referring before to humanism. If I'm an ethicist and I am very strongly addicted to doing the right thing, and for all purposes it might be even in keeping with the Ten Commandments, but I don't know all of the religious things, and I don't know all the proper rituals, and I don't belong to a synagogue, am I still a secular Jew?
There's no question about it that you are a secular Jew. The question is only on what level of intensity do you take seriously your secular Judaism. You can, the Ten Commandments, for example, is a great example, because the Ten Commandments do not include any commandment of ritual. The Ten Commandments are 10 commandments that have nothing to do with, most of them except one, have nothing to do with being a Jew or of being or fulfilling a religious duty. The Ten Commandments express ethical universal values. But if you know only the Ten Commandments, or even if you accept the unprecedented event of the prophets who preferred the principles of ethics to the principles of ritual, which is really an exceptional thing, if you know only that, you know again only a part of Judaism. But if you take this as a point of departure to learn or to be acquainted or to experience, it doesn't have to be only through study. It can be through art. It can be through going to the movies. It can be to going to the opera, to going to performances that give you the feeling and the knowledge of how Jews are creating and how Jews are living. Then you raise your level of Jewishness, of secular Jewishness, and I think you raise your level of your quality of life.
Let's take a small question. Yes, in the back. Ma'am? Could you stand up, please?
Can you talk about how you see American secular Judaism as it differs from Israeli secular Judaism?
The question is if Professor Malkin would differentiate between American secular Judaism and secular Judaism in Israel.
Well, as I described, secular Judaism in Israel is part of our national culture, and people who grow up in Israel and are educated in Israel, and this is the majority of the Jewish youth today, live in a secular culture, in a secular Jewish culture. But in America, most of the people, of the Jews and the secular Jews, live in an American culture. And though it's a very problematic concept today, what is an American culture, but they do live in American culture. Some of them have a little portion of their education in a Jewish community, and many of them do not have, most of them I would say, do not have any opportunity to celebrate their secular Judaism in a framework of a community because they do not belong to a community. And since the national culture is not a Jewish secular culture, so they live outside of secular Jewish culture, outside of Judaism. I would say that the task may be as difficult in Israel as it is in America, because in Israel, those who live in secular Judaism see it as a self-understood thing. They do not even think that you have to think about it, or you have to study it, or you have to do anything about it. You just live it. While in America, in order to live it, you have to get acquainted with it. You have to do something in order to accept or to understand what it is Judaism and what it is secular Judaism.
Yes, so yeah.
I'm not sure that I'm correct in saying, is your daughter a secular rabbi?
Yes, you're correct.
What constitutes, let's say, a Saturday morning in the institution that she will serve? I mean, what kind of, I know what happens in a synagogue when the rabbi is up there and then rituals take place, but what happens in a secular synagogue or a secular institution by a secular rabbi? I'm just curious about
The question is if once we have secular rabbis and then we have secular synagogues, what happens on a secular Shabbat, right? On a secular Saturday morning Shabbat service, what happens there?
Well, we didn't have time to do that, but the history of secular Judaism as a culture didn't start now with the secular rabbis. It started in the 19th century, it developed, and it became institutionalized in the beginning of the 20th century in the 200 secular communities that were started in Israel, the kibbutzim. And they developed a whole new tradition of celebrating Shabbat, celebrating all the holidays, Hanukkah, Pesach, Purim, even Yom Kippur had a secular version to it. And in each one of them, instead of the praying to a God in which they do not believe, to a personal God in which they do not believe, because there are many beliefs in secular Judaism. There is the pantheistic belief, there is the deistic belief, there is the agnostic belief. But all of them, the common denominator is they do not believe in a personal God. So therefore, they don't see any reason or sense in praying to this personal God. Therefore, the prayers were out. But instead came other texts, like in so many ceremonies, even in religious synagogues, like piyutim, like poems, but texts from all the culture of the Jews, including texts from the 20th century or from the Middle Ages or from the Bible. And this text, sometimes in song, sometimes in reading the poem, sometimes in saying a Dvar Torah, not a sermon, but a lecture that is based on text. And this happens today in so many synagogues, in about 40 communities in America and in about 200 communities in Israel, in which these celebrations are going on. They are very festive celebrations. They are sometimes very happy celebrations if they are conducted well, but they are never religious celebrations in the sense that they do not contain the prayer or the blessing of a person, a personal God in which they do not believe.
We have time for just about two more questions, and then again, Professor Malkin will be available afterwards. Yes, sir. Right.
Yeah, I just have one more question, sir. How does secular Judaism define a Jew? What is a Jew according to secular Judaism?
As I quoted my...
The question is, who is a Jew in secular Judaism?
There is no one definition of who is a Jew, because there is not one definition what is the Jewish nation or what is any other nation. The peculiar thing about definitions of nations is that each nation is very unique and different from other nations, but also in its definition. There is nothing in common with the definition of the Swiss nation and the Welsh nation and the Zulu nation and the Gypsy nation and the Jewish nation. Therefore, belonging to a nation is also a question of very unique definitions. I would say that secular Judaism doesn't have a set definition, like, by the way, religious Judaism has a set definition, but it has nothing to do with culture or with religion. It has to do with biology. It has to do with having a mother who is Jewish without being able to prove that the mother is Jewish. It's easier to prove that the father is Jewish. And therefore, there is not one set definition, but it stands to reason that secular Judaism treats Jews, people who join the Jewish nation or who are born in the Jewish nation, live in a Jewish society and in Jewish culture, and it doesn't make any difference if their father or mother is Jewish or not.
Yes, in blue jacket. Could you stand up, please, sir?
First of all, I want to thank you for really a very interesting discussion. I still have, I'm puzzling a little bit about a couple of things you said. One is a specific question about the difference between a secular humanist and a secular Jew. One could surely argue by at least observation that the unaffiliated are made up in a majority sense of people who see themselves, if they think of it at all, and I suspect they don't, as secular humanists rather than secular Jews. So what makes them adherents, I guess, is one question, because if you take Maimonides and Kant and the idea of ethical principles as the basis, it's difficult to see what becomes something that's Jewish unless someone chooses to study Judaism. But you use the word, the education is, and I suspect you meant the education should be.
The question is, and again, it's a very nuanced question, but the question is, what is the difference between a secular humanist and a secular Jew? And Professor Malkin.
There are secular Jews who are not humanists, who are anti-humanists, who do to the other what they hate being done to them. And they can be secular or religious. Like there are various parties, secular regimes, like the secular Nazi regime or the secular Bolshevik regime, who were secular but anti-humanist. So secular doesn't mean humanist. But when you are secular and humanist, the basis of your of this junction of being secular and being a humanist is the ethics of humanism. The ethics that oblige you to act towards the other as you act in a way described by Hillel or by Kant. It obliges you to interfere when you see others doing terrible things to other people, if you can interfere. It obliges you to do exactly the opposite what was done in Europe in the days of Leon Blum and Chamberlain, when they had this anti-interventionist policy, and they did not intervene when Hitler became a real danger. And because they did not intervene, the whole Europe became part of the Nazi empire, a secular anti-humanist empire. And the same principle applies today when you see this kind of regimes who kill their own people, who kill the people, other people, who prepare to kill whole nations, and you decide not to intervene because it's convenient for you not to intervene, not because you cannot intervene, then you are less humanist than those who do intervene. So the difference is a political difference and an ethical difference, but it's not a cultural difference.
Forgive me, I asked the question, not was the difference between a humanist and an anti-humanist. I said, what's the difference between a secular humanist and a secular humanist Jew?
Well, any secular humanist belongs to a nation and lives in a nation. A Jew lives in a Jew who lives in a Jewish nation. I know that there are many Jews who do not live in a Jewish nation and not in a Jewish culture, so it doesn't apply to them. But people don't live in a vacuum, in a void. They live in a culture and in a nation. And therefore, they cannot be a secular humanist without being a secular humanist who is French, or a secular humanist who is German, or a secular humanist who is American, or Pakistani, or whatever. Therefore, the same thing applies to Jews. He is a secular Jewish humanist because he is part of the Jewish nation. If he's not part of the Jewish nation and part of another nation, then he is either a secular or not secular, but part of this other nation.
Okay, I know that people have many other questions. I'm going to have to bring this part of the evening to a close. Please, a round of applause for...
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.